folks, welcome to another Triple T Thursday. For those just joining us, that's tools, tips, and talk, where we'll discuss info for the knife maker. In today's episode, we're going to continue our beginner series and do our second video on grinding. If you haven't watched last video, go watch that one on grinding basics, and now we're going to get into a little more intermediate techniques. Let's get into it.
You need to start with scribe lines. And I've said this before, and I said it in the grinding basics video. Start with the scribe lines so you know your center line. The other scribe lines you should do when you're doing bevels is paint the whole side of the blade and mark on where your bevel is going to be. Okay. And if you're doing preheat treat grinding, put the bevel at least a 1/4 inch lower than you want, because you're going to have a tendency to go past it. So put it lower. The other line that I like to do is I will, in addition to scrabbing this edge, I will mark, after it's blue, I'll take my scribing pen and I'll put a little line right where my bevel is, my plunge line is. So that way, when I'm on either side, I know to go up to that line or not to go past that line. Some people would recommend these guys, which is a file guide where you can clamp this on and that becomes that little line. I personally don't like these because then I can't use the rest because now this is sitting in the way. I don't use them for that purpose. Some people that do total freehand grinding where they're not using the rest and they're doing this, then I guess it's fine. But still, I still think it's a bit limiting. It will give you that line because you can put this on whatever angle you want and then you'll get this line angled to where you want it. I just grabbed this design from Knife Print to use for some illustrations. The first thing I want to talk about is a plunge line. The plunge line is this area right here, okay, where your bevel stops and your ricasso starts. So this area. A lot of people ask a few things about plunge lines. First off, how do I get a rounded plunge line up here? Or how do I change the angle? If I want this on an angle like this instead of straight up and down like this, how do I do that? So the arc of the plunge line here is determined by the belt hanging over the edge of the platen. The more the belt hangs over the edge, the more softer this curve is going to be. In fact, the radius of this curve is directly proportional to the amount of belt that hangs off. So if you've got a 1/4 inch hanging off, you're probably going to get something like this. If you've got it right at the edge of the platen, it's going to be more like this. Let's go over to the platen and I'll show you what I mean. So here the belt is right even with the edge of the platen. This is going to give me a very sharp top of my plunge line. Now I've got it hanging off by about 3/16. So you can see it's much more flexible now. So that's what's going to give you that soft edge, because the pressure here is going to be less than it is here. The more you hang this out, the softer it's going to be. And what you just want to make sure of is look on the back on each side, and you're going to have to make sure you remember to switch sides when you're doing each bevel and make sure that it hangs over the same on each side when you're doing the plunge. So we talked about the plunge line. Now let's talk about this line and what angle it's on. That is purely by how you're going to grind it and how you're holding the knife. So if you're following my advice and you're using the rest, it's where the pivot point is, where you're actually, the angle you're holding the knife on. So let's say this is the platen. Remember, this is the top part. If the tool rest is here, this line is always going to be perpendicular to the rest. So if the rest is right here and you're passing the blade across the rest like this, against this part, it's going to be perfectly straight like this. Okay, if you're putting it here, that means, and going this way, that means your line is going to be more like this. Okay, so it all depends on how you are passing the blade, because remember, if the tool rest is here, okay, the belt is running like this. So this line is going to be parallel with the belt. Next, let's talk about this line, okay, your actual bevel line. So I've marked it so that I'm going to have my rest. I'm going to pass it across the rest like that because this is perpendicular. That's going to give me this pattern. So if I just press this blade up against the belt and I move it exactly even across the belt, I'm going to get an even line like this. Okay, I'm not moving the belt at all, or the knife at all this way. I'm pressing it and I'm sliding it exactly across the belt. That's going to give you this straight line. Okay, and this. Now, if you wanted this on an angle, that also means that it's going to put this line on the same angle. So if your rest is like this line is actually going to want to be more like this. Because remember, those are going to be parallel to your rest and perpendicular, parallel to your belt. So that's what you're going to have a challenge with. This one is a much easier grind to start with because they're perpendicular to those areas. Okay, let's talk about a different bevel, which is also a common one, a bevel that swoops up like this and kind of matches the curve of the blade. How are we going to do that? This one is going to start the same way. You're going to drag it directly across the rest, and then you have to deal with this curve. Let's go over to the belt grinder and talk about how we're going to do this. Okay, so we're going to use this knife as an example and pretend we were doing that same curve we just talked about. We would start by going straight across, and then to match that curve, what you need to do is pull the knife away from, I'm going to accentuate this, pull the knife away from the belt to match the curve. So this, you would start straight, and then I'm pulling this part away to match that curve. So if this was a completely even curve and there was no flat spot, I would start here and just slowly do that. If it was straight and then had a sudden curve at the end, it would be straight and then you would just do the end. And this is something you just got to do by feel. That's why I recommend for new knife makers that are just learning to grind, only do outside curves, meaning curves that go this way. I wouldn't try to do a recurve, because the problem with a recurve is now you need to actually, instead of pull the blade, you need to push it. You need to do this and then change it as you drag the blade across. So the recurves can be very tricky to do because you have to move around. Inside curves, like a karambit, are more advanced. Stay away from inside curves. They are much harder to do, especially if you have a wide, like if you're dealing with a 4-inch grinder, like a 4x36 or something, don't even try it. You really need at least a 2-inch for inside curve, and if it's a really sharp inside curve, you might have to go to an even smaller, narrower blade to get that inside curve. But stick to the outside curves, and you're going to be pulling your blade slightly away from the belt in order to get that curve. So let's talk about the dreaded smiley. For those not familiar with what I'm talking about, when you grind something like this, you will have a tendency when you first start out, it will actually look like this. It will come up here, then this will dip down, and it'll do this. The reason that's doing it is because you're starting, You're putting your blade up against the belt where the belt is right here. Okay, you're putting the edge there and you're pressing this edge down, and then you're releasing a bit of pressure and then continuing it here. And that's giving you this little drop, or really this is going higher. To solve this, don't start your grind at the plunge. Start your grind something like over here. Then work into the plunge. That way you won't get this dip, and it's much better. Plunges don't, if you start at the plunge, you will start to grind this up higher and higher. Start over in the middle of your blade and then just kind of bounce into the plunge. It's easy to push the plunge line in. Obviously, you can't push it out. So start away from the plunge. And sometimes I will start, I will bring it in, and on purpose, I'll be 1/8 of an inch or even more away from my plunge line, because I know later, once this bevel is completely set, I'll be able to just go in and just push my plunge line in and match it on both sides. So don't start there. Start over here and push your plunge line in.
Thanks for joining me in this Triple T, folks. I hope you got something out of these grinding tips. If you need abrasives, go check out Broadback. That's exclusively who I use for my abrasives. Go check them out. They have great stuff. We'll see you on the next one, guys.